Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham. The Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit is reopening after nearly 9 months closed. WDET is across the street, and we've seen the work happening. We're joined by co-director Jova Lynne and renowned artist Olayemi Dabls. And it's Earth Day. When was the last time you just walked in a park? This weekend, you'll have an opportunity to stop in for the Art and Music in the Trees Art Festival at Palmer Park. We'll hear from the organizer, who's simply excited to spread the love and joy of nature and art. But first, the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit is reopening this weekend after closing last year to perform renovations on the space. The first exhibition upon its return will feature a slate of local and international artists, including the renowned Olayemi Dabls. Dabls is well known for his African Bead Museum on the city's west side. He is also a storyteller, sculptor, and painter with work spanning 45 years. His reopening exhibition at MOCAD will be a retrospective of his work in that time. Here to discuss the exhibition is Dabls himself. Welcome to the Metro.
Thank you.
Of course, and we're also joined by co-director and artistic director for MOCAD, Jova Lynne. Jova, welcome back.
Thanks, Tia. I'm happy to be back.
Of course. So I want to start with you, Dabls, your journey as an artist. Nowadays, conversation about your work starts with the Bead Museum, but your work includes more than beads. You use other materials as well. So when you began as an artist, especially when you began as an artist in residence at the Wright Museum, what was it like when you were beginning your artistic journey?
It was an entirely different world.
Yeah.
I knew very little about anything that African people had done to art. During those days, we were not connected with Africa, so it never crossed my mind. But I needed a way of telling the story at the museum at that time because we started from scratch. We started with an ideal of an African-American museum. So being an artist, I had to decide how would we produce exhibits. The first thing we ran up against is that all the pictures of all the events that we have been involved with were copyrighted by photographers and the papers who published those items. So we literally had to use our artists images to create the exhibits that we made.
From scratch.
From scratch. So I had to create these ideas that represented various movements we were engaged in. So that required for me to learn a different way of producing art, very instantly and very precise to tell a story. So that's how we started out.
Now, for folks who are listening and probably not understanding, but you're talking about, the Charles H. Wright Museum before it was in its current location when it was on West Grand Boulevard.
Yes.
Wow. So if you can, just take us back to that time of being a young artist in the city of Detroit, creating and trying to spread the message of not just Black art, but African art.
Well, I came from General Motors working as a detail draftsman, and I was involved in an automobile accident, back injury. So my doctor said, you need to find a place to volunteer. So I chose the museum. The idea in my head about the museum was far different than what I saw. Most of us really had any experience with museums at the time. So I just decided that I would create what was called the Civil Rights Decade at the time. It was a period covered from the Supreme Court decided that segregation and integration were not equal. And the next major accomplishment was Rosa Parks not giving up her seat. Then there occurred some other things that came along the line. So there were no images of that event. So I built an exhibit that was called the Civil Rights Decade, which consists of 55 images detailing all the rights that we had achieved in the struggle to get to that point. So I decided to illustrate those exhibits. And part of those pieces will be at the exhibit. And then after that, I decided to illustrate Southern life, and that it was focused on two different areas, white people and black people doing the same thing but separate. So following that, I created a series which was called Hannibal. And Hannibal was an African who crossed the Alps and kept Rome at bay for 15 years, and he was later killed by his cousin or nephew. So those were the types of exhibit that I was building. And once you create a style, it's very difficult to create another style to illustrate events. Mm-hmm. So I went from painting to using paper cutouts because it was much faster, and I didn't have time to spend a lot of time drawing a particular subject. So that took place over a period of about 10 years. Then later I developed another style, which was called using materials, iron, rocks, wood, and mirrors. And that's the area that I'm still in. But I first had to learn some things about nature. Involving with African material culture, that's when I had to study what were the people, why were the people using iron, rocks, wood, and mirrors? And that was a history lesson in itself, because all of those various materials requires a knowledge of things around you.
So why did you ask that question about the materials? What made you say, let me ask a deeper question about the materials that I'm using to create my work?
Because things have to make sense. The knowledge of the information, how complex African systems were, it required for me to understand those materials. For instance, iron. When iron was discovered, it blew the mind of people who were trying to use iron. And I discovered that iron, there's enough iron in each and every one of us to make a 3-inch nail. And the process of making iron from rocks is quite involved in itself, because you have to know something about the materials that you're working with. Rocks, my ancestors knew that life plants grew on the surface of these rocks that we're floating around here in space in. Mirrors, when mirrors were discovered, African people had to figure out a way to use mirrors, in which they did. And mirrors do some things that we're not conscious of ourselves. You can look in a mirror and see things that are millions of years out in space in the palm of your hand. So that became quite a story in itself. And mirrors in Michigan, it's bad luck if you have a broke mirror in your possession.
Yes.
So that I thought was going to be quite involved, getting people to look at mirrors and not fear there was 7 years of bad luck. And the next item I worked with was the wood itself. For instance, our ancestors said that the tree was their ancestor, literally. And with the advent of the internet, I get a lot of videos from people showing me that there are plenty of insects out there that look like leaves, twigs on trees. So one day I asked, there was a professor in the gallery, I thought he would be able to explain it to me. I said, well, how can an animal come across as a tree and yet be a tree? And he said, oh, it's just camouflage. That answer really doesn't answer the question. For an insect to have the ability to look like a tree or a leaf, and actually those things are coming from inside, so it's not a camouflage. It's something inside of the insect that triggered that. So that's the information that I was dealing with. Now, I did about 15 years of research at the African American Museum. Following that, my wife and I had a store, and this was the advent of Africans coming to this country, and they brought things here to sell. And they would have these items that are made out of these materials, and then they would tie their personal history into it. So that gave me a new way of looking at the current situation that we're in here. Remember, this is this early 70s to the 80s, and the relationship between Africans and Europeans at that time was not that bad. But working at the museum for 15 years, I saw the way that we approached that. We wasn't resolving any issue. We were just creating more tension with people we would expose that to. So I decided I need a different way of building these exhibits without making people angry, mad, feeling bad about history. So I decided to look at how Africans used those various materials, and they created metaphors with those materials. So the installation that's at the museum is titled Iron Teaching Rocks How to Rust. And I was able to use those 4 different materials in that installation.
I mean, we could break that and unpack so much of just that alone, just the materials and the way that you found the stories within those materials and the way you brought them out to tell those stories. Yeah. But I do want to turn to Jova really quickly. Jova, as an artist yourself, given the rich history Dabls has in the arts world in Detroit and beyond, and all the people he's inspired, what's the significance of reopening with Dabls alongside some of the other artists?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Tia. Well, first of all, I just want to say that Dabls' legacy is beyond, and there's so much in the show that there's so much work that didn't make it to the show because it's just hundreds and hundreds of drawings, installations, paintings, etc. So I think I have to just shout out the incredible team at MOCAD, our curatorial exhibitions team, everybody really who's put their foot on this project. We have been working with Dabls for over a year now, just like unearthing a lot of his archive and really working together to suss out and trace this history. So I think for MOCAD to be a non-collecting institution, for MOCAD to be an institution that's mission is rooted in knowledge sharing, it feels very timely to have Dabls' exhibition up as a storyteller, as somebody who is so committed to knowledge sharing across cultures. And so I think having unearthed all these materials, having worked together for over a year, we've been talking about the show for a really long time, and now seeing it realize has been such an incredibly rewarding situation to be in. And I'm so grateful to Dabls and Aleki for trusting us with this, but the significance, I think, is really reminding the city MOCAD is back, we're open. Second of all, that we care about artists and that we're going to put their stories first. So Dabls is a headliner, but we have 3 other amazing shows that are also opening that really reinforce that part of our mission that we are a site for knowledge.
Jova, with all that you had to go through, all of the collection from 40 plus years of a career, how long did it take you to put it together and curate it? I know you said you've been working on it for about a year, but you've also been working on renovations and so much more. So, talk about what went into putting this together, sifting through and sorting through all that information.
So, I think it's interesting, the metaphor about about trees that Dabls shared, because for every tree there is a seed. And so this exhibition started as a seed, as an idea. Dabls is a Kresge Eminent Award winner. Dabls has been featured in thousands of publications, news sites, etc. But his work being positioned in an institutional setting is something different. Mm-hmm. And so when we were talking about the show, we were saying, what does it mean to have the museum represent MBAD, African Bead Museum, and his legacy? And so it was really about parsing through what are the show is curated in 4 parts. So what are the 4 elements that really have shaped Dabls' artistic legacy in the city? And then how can we have a call and response between MOCAD and MBAD? So we're not just trying to get people to come to MOCAD. We're trying to get people to take what they've learned at MOCAD. We have a beautiful map of every public artwork that Dabls has made in the city of Detroit to go to all those sites and MBAD and really have this call and response. Like, think about it like a melody with the city. That's just, MOCAD is a part of that.
You're listening to The Metro. I'm speaking with renowned artist Oleyemi Dabls and MOCAD co-director and co-artistic director Jova Lynne. When we return, we'll talk about MOCAD's highly anticipated return, and we'll learn a little bit more about Dabls. You all stay right there. You're listening to The Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Tia Graham. The Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit is reopening this weekend, and its first show back will feature a slate of artists, including renowned painter, sculptor, and storyteller Oleyemi Dabls. Dabls is well known for his African Beat Museum on the city's west side, and we're continuing the conversation right now with Dabls and MOCAD artistic director Jova Lynne. Now, Jova, we're going to stick with you just for a moment. We're going to jump right back to Dabls. But Jova, you all are very intentional about including Dabls because of how ingrained his work is with the city of Detroit. It's pretty much synonymous with Detroit.
Absolutely.
So what does his work say about the trajectory of Detroit's art ecosystem?
That's a really thick question. So I'm gonna do my best here, but I think Dabls, specifically, even as we were talking about earlier, that material study. Dabls is a person whose family migrated to Detroit from the South. He is a veteran. He is somebody who worked the assembly lines, did all of this like very classic like Detroit tale, and then pivoted to art after this accident that he was in. And I think that trajectory in and of itself talks about the way an artist's life, first of all, is long and lives through a city. So when I think about the arts ecosystem, first of all, I'm not from Detroit. I'm from New York City, but when I visited Detroit...
You've been embraced.
I've been embraced.
You're
11
embraced.
years, baby. Let's go.
Let's go.
When I first came here, every time I kept going back to MBAD. And I think that as an artist myself, as a person who works with many artists, to be able to be integrated into a truly immersive experience of art as you visit a city creates your understanding, or is the foundation of the understanding of the ecosystem, right? Like Dabls, I think, is representative not only of the ecosystem, but also the ecosystem being an actual ecosystem. So like giving back to other artists, mentoring so many artists across the city, making sure that artists think about their sort of longevity in a city and what that legacy means. I think Dabls is a great example of what legacy could mean. I also do think it's a testament to the community of artists that help we build and we shape each other, right? Nobody's working in a vacuum. And I think Dabls' practice is truly a testament to that. I also do want to say Dabls show, we have amazing shows, but I wanted to shout out the Carol Harris show because Dabls and Carol Harris have known each other for a very, very, very long time. And I think for both of them to be exhibiting at the same time feels tremendous. Dabls gave me a suitcase full of hundreds of magazines, and I found one of them. It was an article from 2011, and it was Dabls, Carol Harris, Gilda Snowden, Sabrina Nelson, and I'm sorry, one other artist whose name I can't remember right now. And I was just like, this is so Detroit.
I mean...
And so like that is an example. It's in the archives, it's in the now, it's in the contemporary where we're doing both of these shows at the same time, along with an emerging brilliant artist, Martha Misko, and internationally known artist, Laurie Skriard. And I think for me to be shaping this artistic vision and working with, I have to say, an incredible curatorial team who cares very deeply about the city of Detroit. I think this is a moment for MOCAD to claim the space that it's already taken up, where we're revealing these histories in the now.
And one more question, because you brought up fiber artist Carol Harris, and, you know, can you walk us through why you all decided to combine these different artists together.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people we need to challenge ourselves around the notion of the relationship between craft as a field and contemporary practice. And craft is contemporary. And so I think we have Carol Harris, who's a five-brace artist, Martha Misko, who's actually a painter / installation artist who also uses photography. And so I think, and then Laura Skriard, who's a very conceptual artist and uses projection and video. And so I think offering our visitors as we reopen, it's also, we're reopening and starting our 20th year. MOCAD has been around for 20 years. And so opening with this really beautiful array of multidisciplinary art and artists who are working deeply with material studies feels timely. It feels like an opportunity and also a meaningful way that children and families can engage with art in a city like Detroit.
Bringing you back into the conversation, Dabls, I want to turn to your iconic African Bead Museum, of course. At what point did you recognize beads needed to be the focus for your museum?
First, that was Bill Sanders.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Leave him out.
Yeah.
I had a very good working knowledge of the education that African people had received about African material culture. All the mask, textiles, carvings, all had been given a negative image. For instance, African material culture was referred to as art of the savage people, art of people that do not have any training. It's just some stuff made up. So when my wife and I opened the first gallery, the first thing that was occurring in this city, which spearheaded by the African American Museum, was a couple of guys, maybe 4 or 5, came up with introducing African art to the American community, and they focus on food, clothing, and entertainment. But what came along with them were the vendors. They brought in the art, the material culture, and the beads. Now, having a working knowledge about how African material culture was received, I never thought of the ideal of having anything remotely related to Africa, because up to that point, Africa was seen as the most negative place on the planet, especially when it came to what was called magic, voodoo, etc. But along came these beads. My first time seeing them were on a table at the African World Festival, the first festival. So I walked up to the dealer and asked him to sell me the strand around his neck. Of course, he took offense to it. So I said to him, in this country, everything has a price. That just pissed him off even more. So he said, my brother, let me explain to you what's going on here. These beads that I'm wearing represent 5 generations.
Wow.
And he began to explain them to me. For the first time, I was exposed to someone that really had oral history, because he talked about how significant these beads were. So I got the ideal immediately. I will sell beads and become rich. Of course, it didn't work. Because beads had never been sold. They were given to people by people in the community for accomplishments, anything that you've done that denoted where you're at in your point of life. So I still purchased the beads. They didn't sell. Then I got the ideal, how about making this an African bead museum? Because what were people saying? They would listen to my story, but they'd leave out without buying anything. So I'm okay. Since I'm going to sit here and put myself through all this torture, let me change the name of this place so I won't feel as though the business is not working. So that's why I came up with the ideal African Bead Museum. Now, I didn't know at the time there's not a culture group on this planet that had not had beads in their culture, but most didn't know about it because the world was pushing the 21st century, so people began to not associate anything with beads, but they were still around. So the museum grew and people started visiting from all over the world because I'm the only one that's thinking about beads as being relevant. So that's how I got into the beads. And the next story that made that interesting is that these people who traveled here from all over the world, mainly European countries, so all over the world is like a metaphor. So they came, they started giving me information about beads. I didn't know that beads had been around for 30,000 years. And I did not know beads were so integrated into the various cultures. And I definitely didn't know they wouldn't sell. But I'm committed now. Yeah. I have all these beads displaying. Now, up until that point in time, the only thing I knew about displaying, the object has to have room, it has to be able to breathe, and it has to be separated. So I thought about that. I said, this little 10 by 12 foot room here, I don't have enough space for that. So I said, well, people have been enjoying the beads as they are now, so I didn't change that. I didn't put captions. I didn't try to identify any particular beads. And it worked because people come to the table with all kinds of information that you don't learn in school. It's just passed on through DNA of family heritage. So I began to just build this bead shop and have people literally from the other part of the planet saying, I heard about this store and I had to get here and see. So I recognized that word of mouth is still very powerful. And no one passed judgment that have everything they need. It's people who lack a knowledge of what's going on will come in and judge me. Most people saw it as a beautiful experience. So that's how I got involved with beads.
Yeah, Jova.
The thing I also want to add to that is that MOCAD African Bead Museum, some folks who are local might know this, but some folks might not. In 2000, was it 24 Dabls? Yes. There was a part of the museum that was actually unfortunately demolished by the city. Right. And that part of the museum held over 2,000 paintings that Dabls had produced. And so a part of the story of the beads is also the journey of Dabls and Dabls practice and sort of this like disinvestment from, or this violent act, I will just say plainly, that really has resulted in a loss of work. And so as we're going through this archive, we're realizing there's so many things that unfortunately won't be present in the show. And so as we think about beads and collecting beads, capturing beads as a part of storytelling, I also just want to acknowledge the grief and the loss that the city experienced in that demolishing, which is represented in the exhibition as well.
And yeah, I was going to say that's a question that I wanted to ask you was about just the demolishing of part of the building, you know, and what that meant to you, you know, to lose that space.
My whole approach to art itself is not a personal connection. I see art as a way of preserving the history of that individual as he goes through life. But sometimes we get caught up with ideals that has nothing to do with a particular culture. So I never thought second about losing that work. It hurt from the point of view that it was gone, that no one would be able to see it. But it wasn't enough to move me in such a way that I would not stop doing what I'm doing now. But here's an interesting story. I asked a lady named Artie Riddick to sell me that building in 1974. So she came out, I looked at the bill, and I told her what I wanted to do with it. But the minute I mentioned land contract, oh, she went off on me. So why are you wasting my time? I don't want no land contract. I want money, man. What are you talking about? People don't pay on land contracts. But I later realized that people had been trying to steal her property. Her husband was a Ford worker, and they had developed a lot of real estate in this city. Now, she left me in my store with people looking at me thinking I'm trying to take advantage of her. So I said, how am I going to get this woman out of here? So I said, why don't you just give it to me then? Oh, she said, you're a nut. And she left. But she called me back about a week later, and she said, you promised me you're going to do what you said you were going to do, because I had explained to her I wanted to do an African bead museum. So on that, she gave the property to me. So watching the property being destroyed, I was more interested in, she's not alive, but I had promised her that I would make this a bead museum.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there watching tear down. So the museum itself has an interest in history. And for those who study history, it's always the history that you tell that gets you to that point that's more significant than anything you want to do. So we still exist. We have a lot of property that we're using that's not ours. Wow. It belongs to the city. Yeah. I've never tried to deny that, because any city that's worth its weight in gold should preserve the culture of the people who are there. And sometimes you have to take things and then people see the results of how people interact with it. See, no one knows that we have people from all over the world has been to that space, because that was the time when people were saying, turn the lights out when you leave Detroit. Mm-hmm. So the people in the city would send them to see us, and they would come over there and think we was something special because we were housing bees. But at that time, bees were being sold at the local festivals of African people. You could almost get them for no cost. The value hadn't been associated with them, because the value is always in your culture. It's not in the material things. So that's how we got to where we are now with the museum, by people in the community doing their part.
So before we get out of here, because we're running down on time, I want to ask you, Dabls, about your exhibition that will be opening up at MOCAD, Detroit Cosmologies. It's a fusion of African symbols in Detroit's landscape. What do those two things have in common, in your opinion?
Everything. Well, those installations that are on our field and that are in this exhibit, there were a lot of people in the community who participated in doing the hard labor. And they all were saying, well, Dabls, what if I make a mistake? I said, well, that's going to be the most important part about what we're doing here. We're not trying to do anything but make something nice so people could look at it. And the best way you do that, you have as many ideas of people involved with it, and you will see the results of it. So it's a lot of people covering that 30-year period of time. Mm-hmm. I've had lots of help, so much that I can't identify in the show, because I would say to them that you can't make no mistake. You're going to create something that we like. So, and the results of it is to have this show that's representative of all these people who have played a part in the building of this installation. And,
you know, you have a deep connection, you know, with passing this knowledge down to children and families and the next generation of people. Can you just talk about the importance of the work that you've been able to do over your career and what it means for the next generation?
Well, the next generation, they reach their own conclusions by what's there. I have never done anything trying to influence anyone, because if what you're doing has the energy of your people, that's representative of your culture, that information will be passed on anyway. There are people who come in there as adults now with children as old as they were when they came there, telling me I said so-and-so to them to make them do what I'm looking at. This person don't realize I have no idea what he's talking about. Structured learning is very deceptive. People learn more from you by observation than what you're trying to trick them into believing. That's one of the beautiful things about this planet. If you're using materials that your ancestors used, you're passing on information that they have no idea where they're getting it from. Most of the ideas we think are coming from us is not.
I wish we could talk the entire hour, but oh my goodness. Jova Lynne is the artistic director for MOCAD, and renowned artist Olayemi Dabls is the founder of the African Bead Museum. Jova, Dabls, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro. MOCAD's Spring 2026 exhibition, which will include Dabls' work, opens this Saturday, April 25th. I want to say once again, thank you both so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Tia. Thank you, Dabls.
Coming up, it's Earth Day. This weekend, you can get out and explore the old-growth forest of Palmer Park with the Art and Music in the Trees Festival. You all stay right there. This is The Metro.